Okay, so for today, I'll be presenting a quick bio for our speakers. And we have Varun Soni serving as the Dean of Religious Life of the University of Southern California, who is a multidisciplinary scholar with a diverse educational background spanning in law, religious studies, and public diplomacy. As a prolific writer and producer, he explores the intersections of religion, popular culture, and diplomacy, contributing to various publications and media platforms while also actively engaging in interreligious dialogue and community service. Vanessa Gomez-Brake serves as the pioneering Associate Dean of Religious Life at the University of Southern California, where she supports a diverse array of student religious and spiritual groups. As the first humanist chaplain in this role at any American university, she also provides confidential counseling and supports to undocumented Trojans and has received recognition for her contributions to interfaith dialogue and community service, including awards from the NASPA and the Unitarian Universalist Humanist Association. So thank you both for being here, and I will now be leaving this time up to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here at this session this morning. Really grateful for this opportunity to speak with you about such an important topic. I'd also like to welcome our other Associate Dean, the Reverend Dr. Brandon Harris. Thank you for being here. We're mostly just grateful to you for getting us off campus today. And, we may never go back, honestly. It's commencement. There's never been a commencement like this one. Exactly. So today we're going to talk about youth and spirituality, and what I thought might be helpful is maybe I could talk for a little while about trends that I've seen over the last 16 years as the Dean of Religious and Spiritual Life, and then Vanessa might talk about programs that we do in order to support students, so hopefully we can offer a bookend conversation of general trends and then specific approaches or remedies for the challenges we see. And more than anything, what we'd like to do is just have a conversation with everyone and learn from you. So we'll try to leave some time for conversation. And I know I'm ultimately standing between you and lunch, and so I take that very seriously. So over the last 16 years, I've served as the Dean of Religious and Spiritual Life at the University of Southern California, which essentially means I'm the university's chaplain. It's a different title, but there's no real distinction in the work portfolio. And in that job, I get to be the chief religious leader of a campus with 50,000 students representing 140 countries and every faith tradition in the world. At USC, we oversee more than 90 student religious groups. We have more than 40 campus chaplains. That's more religious groups and campus chaplains than any American university. And we do this work in the heart of Los Angeles, which according to Harvard University is the most religiously diverse city in human history. So you can imagine there's really not a dull moment in the work that we do ever. No 2 days are the same. But over the 16 years, I've seen a lot of change in the work I do, and I've seen a lot of change in the students, their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations, their fears. When I first got to USC in 2008, there was a lot of hope and change in the air. I mean, when I was hired, everyone in the country was an ordained Protestant minister, and they hired me, a non-ordained Hindu attorney. So they were really thinking outside the box, and it was partly because in 2008, it was a good time to be a young person with an unusual name and an unusual background. Everything I felt like had worked against me worked for me in that one moment, in that zeitgeist moment. I totally rode Obama's coattails into this job. And when I got to campus, what I encountered was the hope and change in the world was the hope and change on campus. Even though our students in 2008 were living through a financial crisis where they saw their parents lose half their net worth overnight, our students still had a lot of hope, a lot of joy. They wanted to be the change that they wanted to see in the world. And the conversations I had with my students, the intimate pastoral care conversations, the spiritual counseling conversations, were very similar to the conversations that I had with my university chaplain when I was growing up. There were conversations about, how do I live my dreams? How do I change the world? How do I translate my values into action? What matters to me? Why does it matter to me? What's the nature of God? What's the nature of reincarnation? What is joy? What is transcendence? Those are the conversations that I live for. Those are the conversations that drew me to the job. And it was also the golden age of interfaith. Every student I met wanted to do interfaith. Rather than going deep into their tradition, they really wanted to go wide across traditions. And as a result, we did all sorts of interfaith events, including with the White House. We spoke at the White House and presented at the White House every year for 6 years, with the mayor's office, with the governor's office. And so what I remember in that time between 2008 and, say, 2014 is the hope, the joy, the interfaith work, and the desire for students to be part of the solution to the great crises of the world. And one of the ways they were able to do that is by meeting each other. I'm a professor of comparative religion, and the reason I became a professor of comparative religion is because I felt as though in the classroom I could perhaps help students think about each other in different ways, maybe help them overcome generational prejudice, or maybe help them think about other faith traditions in ways that they hadn't before. And in doing that work, I thought maybe I could be part of the solution to the challenge of religious violence, of religious discrimination, of religious prejudice. And I think I do. Honestly, I have 200 students in my class. It's called Global Religions in Los Angeles. And I do think that that class opens their minds to perspectives they wouldn't otherwise have. But what I also realized, and what the data tells us, is the best way to actually change your mind is to change your heart. And the way that you do that isn't necessarily by learning about other people in a classroom. It's by knowing those people. And so where I began to see the real opportunity wasn't so much in the classroom, but out of the classroom. Because it's really hard to be anti-Semitic if your roommate is Jewish. It's really hard to be Islamophobic if your girlfriend is Muslim. It's really hard to hate people if you love people. And it's really easy to hate people that you've never met before, right? And so at a university like ours with, like I said, 50,000 students representing 140 countries, this was the place where people could meet each other, walk alongside each other, grow alongside each other. This is the place where people could see their own experiences in the experiences of others, could see themselves in the other, right? And so I saw that often. I remember in 2008, I started my job, and just a few months later, there were horrific terrorist attacks in India. And we have more students from India than any American university, so this hit our campus really hard. These were the 2008 November attacks in Mumbai, and one of the hotels that was the epicenter of that attack was a hotel, the Taj Hotel, that was owned by one of USC's trustees, Ratan Tata. So this hit really close to home. And my own in-laws were supposed to be in that hotel that night, and we thought they were, but at the last second they had stayed in a different hotel. And so even in my own family, I could see the pain and angst that my students were feeling. I remember we hosted a memorial service after those attacks, and for the first time in my life, I saw Indian students and Pakistani students come together and embrace each other and read from each other's holy texts and light candles with each other and talk about how they were both victims of this religious violence, right? This would never have happened in India or Pakistan. I'm from India. I'm from the part of India that was partitioned, from Punjab. These are the stories that I was raised with. And these students would have never met in India, and they would have never met in Pakistan. And yet, they met in this moment of great tragedy right here at USC. And because of that, they formed friendships. And over the next 4 years, I saw these students play cricket together, have Bollywood movie parties together, order pizza for each other, study for finals with each other. And I know that they went back to India and Pakistan with a different consciousness about what was happening on the other side of the border. I know they went back to their sort of roles in the world with an open heart and with a new story to tell. And that inspired me so much that I thought to myself, I can't believe they're paying me to do this job. Honestly, I can't believe they're paying me to do this job. But that all changed in 2014. And I went from, I can't believe they're paying me to do this job, to they cannot pay me enough to do this job. And that happened almost generationally, which is when millennials started to leave campus and post-millennials started to come. This was 2014. And oftentimes, these post-millennials were actually the younger brothers and sisters of the millennials. So nature and nurture were the same, but there was something very different with this generation. And what I realized it was that these were the first digital natives. You know, even millennials were digital migrants. I'm Gen X, we were digital migrants. We grew up in an analog world and became digital. But these students, post-millennials, have had their entire life online, their entire social experience mediated online. They've spent their lives comparing the real life that they lead with the curated, idealized Instagram lives of others. And I began to see in real time the devastating impact that was having on their mental, emotional, and spiritual health. The numbers that keep me up at night, and I think the numbers that should keep all of us up at night, are 65, 35, 10. Right now, we're in a situation where 65% of our students on college campuses are so consumed by anxiety that they're having trouble functioning. So anxiety is now baseline. That's the baseline. 35% of our students are wrestling with depression or some other kind of mental health challenge, and 10% of our students have had thoughts of suicide over the last year. And so on a campus of 50,000 students, on a campus that looks like it's right out of a Hollywood movie set, on a campus that looks like a brochure for what a campus should look like, on a campus with 320 days of sunlight every year, on a campus that is the Hollywood campus, the football campus, the dream for so many students. I have 5,000 students walking around each day on my beautiful campus thinking about their own death. And half of them, 2,500 students, who have a suicide plan. And as a result, I've probably overseen more memorial services for students than anyone in the country over the last 15 years. And when we have suicide on our campus, we have contagion, we have copycat, right? We have clusters. And so these are the numbers that really, like I said, they still keep me up. And every year I noticed from 2014 on, it got worse and worse and worse. And at the root of it, I found there was another crisis. In 2014, I started talking about a mental health crisis in American higher education. Everyone thought I was an alarmist. Last year, 80% of college presidents and university presidents said that their number one concern and number one challenge, not free speech, not tenure, not public safety. They might have changed their analysis this year. I'm talking about last year. Not donors, not the political landscape. Their number one challenge, the mental health of their students and faculty. Right? But now that 10 years later, everyone is talking about what I was talking about 10 years ago, I no longer see what we're going through as a mental health crisis. I now see it as a spiritual health crisis, and that's why I appreciated the comments so much this morning, because I do not believe we have a mental health crisis anymore of anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation. I believe we have a spiritual health crisis of meaning-making, community building, and human connection that manifests as anxiety, depression, and suicidality. This is also, and this was mentioned earlier, but I'll have to mention it again. The book that really changed my way of thinking about this was a book given to me by a friend of mine when I became a father in 2014 for the first time, and that was The Spiritual Child by Lisa Miller, and she's become a friend of mine too. You should read this book if you haven't already, because what she says is that if you have an intergenerational spiritual or religious experience growing up. That means if you go to church or synagogue or masjid or gurdwara or temple with parents or grandparents growing up, then you are 70% less likely to experience depression as a young adult. And so the things that we have as children in terms of protective factors that religion has historically provided to people are the things that protect us as young adults. And what I see on my campus is the biggest story in American religion today, and that is the rapid disaffiliation from religion. In 1950, 2% of Americans were not affiliated with religion, 2%. Today, 25% of Americans are not affiliated with religion. That's the fastest growing religious demographic in the country. It's not Christianity, it's not Islam, it's those who are not affiliated. But for our college students, for my first year students, what do you think the percentage is that's not affiliated with religion? 51%. Double the national population, probably 10x their grandparents. We're talking about 5% of grandparents not affiliated with religion, 50% of grandchildren not affiliated with religion. This is the biggest story happening in American religion today, right? It's happening in real time. And so when I see the unprecedented number of young people who are not affiliated with religion, with the unprecedented number of young people who are going through a mental and spiritual health crisis, correlation doesn't always equal causality, but in this case, I am convinced it does. And so, why is this generation more depressed than students were during the World War II? And why is this generation more anxious than students were during the Great Depression? Because they're going through two things that no generation has ever gone through, and they're going through them at the exact same time. So it's easy to be critical of a generation of coddled snowflakes, but none of us have ever gone through what they're going through. The first, of course, is the loss of religion, which I talked about, the loss of the protective factors of meaning, purpose, identity, community, awe, transcendence, the essential aspect and language of what it means to be human, right? And I tell our students, you don't need religion, you don't even need God, but you need something sacred in your life. You need something that gets you up in the morning, not just something that keeps you up at night. You need a North Star. Your compass has to point somewhere. That can be hip-hop. That can be sports. That doesn't have to be theological in any way, but you need something sacred in your life, and I see that our students really struggle with that. The second sort of trend that intersects with this is the rise of social media. Like I said, these are the first digital natives. They talk with their thumbs and not their tongues. For 100,000 years, we've been communicating in a particular way. We've been in community in a particular way, and now with this generation, we're like, let's try something new. And we wonder why we're seeing what we see. We have no longitudinal data study for what we're going through right now, right? And so when we take away the historic protective factor of religion and replace it with a brand new aggregating factor of social media, which is designed by social scientists and psychologists to keep people outraged and to keep people anxious, and then we wonder why our students are breaking. And then we put them in the pressure cooker of a university, and then we wonder why our students are breaking. Well, I think we are complicit in that in many ways. We have to think about our own role in creating the world in which they live in. So no generation has ever gone through what our students have gone through. I could talk a lot. I want to give the floor over to Vanessa, but let me just say one last thing here, is that when I got to USC, we had 20 mental health counselors and a 3-week waiting list to see one. About 8 years later, we had 40 mental health counselors and a 3-week wait list to see one. Today, we have 80 mental health counselors at USC. That's an extraordinary number. I don't know any university that has that many. How long is our wait list to see one? 3 weeks. So we can barely keep up with the demand. We haven't tripled our student population since I've gotten there, but we've tripled our mental health counselors, and we're still not able to move the process any faster. And what I realized is that at one point I was appointed as vice provost of campus wellness and crisis intervention, so I began to think about this in a big way. And what I realized is that we're too busy operating downstream. All we do is triage crisis at its worst, and then we move on to triage crisis, triage crisis, triage crisis. We're just trying to get people out of the river. But we're not going upstream to see why people are getting in that river to begin with. And so the goal of my office, and Vanessa will talk about how we do this, is to operate upstream, to give people the tools, perspective, techniques, communities, and confidence to be proactive in their own thriving, well-being, and flourishing, right? To give them the power to not get into that river to begin with. And my thesis is that the more we do upstream, the less crisis, threat, and suffering we're going to triage downstream. The challenge is that you can't prove a negative. You can't prove that because we're operating upstream, there's less crisis downstream. It's hard to fund things that you can't prove. It's hard to fund the proactive work. It's easier to fund the reactive work. And yet, as long as we're reactive, we're never actually solving the problem. We're not empowering students in sort of the art of living, or we're not connecting them to the possibility of a spiritual life. The primary issue right now that I see is, my teacher, Deepak Chopra, tells me there's 5 crises in the world today. There's war, justice, sustainability, and health. Those are the 4 that we all know about. But he says that the 5th crisis is the most important, and if we don't solve this crisis, we can't solve the other 4. And not all of us can solve the other 4, but all of us have to be part of the solution to the 5th. He says the 5th crisis is the crisis of joy. And I see that on my campus and in the world. And so I've become an evangelist for joy. And so I've been thinking about, like, how are people happy? Like, how do people find joy? What's going on? And so every year I look at the UN's list of the happiest countries in the world. And every year Norway's number 1, and the Scandinavian countries are like 2, 3, 4, right? And I keep wondering, how is it possible that in a country with terrible weather and high taxes, people are so happy? I mean, I understand the high tax part living in California, but not the terrible weather part. How could you be that happy? Right? And what I realized is that people aren't happy in Norway because they pay high taxes or because they have terrible weather. They're happy because they have trust. They have trust that their taxes are going to benefit them. They have trust that their democratic processes are working. They have trust because when they pay that tax, they get a benefit. They get health care. They get education. They get a pension. They have trust that their institutions have their back. Young people today have no trust in institutions. We've moved from institutions to individuals, right? They have no trust in universities. Trust me on that one. We get petitions every day. You can see what's happening with the encampments and the fact that now universities are arresting their own students. That's eroded whatever little trust there was to begin with. So they have no trust in their own educational institutions. They have no trust in their political institutions. That's why young people are going to sit out this election or vote third party or be independent, because they just do not trust the political institutions. They have no trust in economic institutions. Why do you think we have a $1 trillion cryptocurrency industry? It's largely driven by millennials and post-millennials who have no trust in banking or third-party intermediaries because of what they've seen with the 2008 financial crisis, with the Federal Reserve, and with the insane inflation that's going on in this country right now. They have no trust. And they have no trust in religious institutions. That's why 51% are not affiliated with religion. So without trust, how do you thrive? How do you flourish? How do you find joy? I think that is the fundamental challenge right now on our campus. And when you don't have trust, you have the spiritual crisis that I see at the root of all this. And that is the spiritual crisis of loneliness. Cigna said that the loneliest people in the country right now, Cigna is this healthcare group, are not the oldest people. Historically, it was the oldest people who are the loneliest, right? And we all know that being lonely has a public health consequence. Being lonely, extreme loneliness is the equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, that it can take 7 years off your life, right? And we know that when you're older, being lonely is a contributor to premature death. But for the first time probably in our history, Cigna is telling us that the loneliest people in the country are not the oldest, but 18 to 26-year-olds. Those are our college students. Our college students who are on campuses with 50,000 people their age are lonelier than anyone in the country right now, right? And so I think at the root of it, we have to crack the crisis of loneliness for young people, the crisis of disconnection, to understand that social media has made our students antisocial, has made them less connected, has given them FOMO, has made them feel less than. On a campus which has a 9% acceptance rate, 70% of my students feel like imposters. How is that even possible? How is that even possible? And so these are the challenges that we're trying to figure out. And Vanessa is going to tell you how we solved them all. So, Vanessa.
I do have all the answers. Let's dive in. Well, good morning, everyone. It is a delight to be gathering with you in downtown LA and here at the beautiful and historic Biltmore Hotel. Varun was telling me a bit of the history as we were walking through, and there's just so much to know, even about what this building represents and the many celebrations and other things that have taken place here. But I think I wanted to start a little bit with telling you a bit more about Varun and I and the history of higher ed chaplaincy, as well as tell you a bit about myself. That will help you understand the way in which we approach our work. If any of you have gone to a university, you might know here in the US, most of our institutions have a history of being affiliated with one Christian denomination or another. So USC, what were we before we were the Trojans? Shout it out. We were the Fighting Methodists. So we had a few correct ones back there. And so early on, the first 4 presidents of USC were also Methodist ministers. And then eventually with time, like a lot of our secular institutions now, they just part ways with their denomination. But it's interesting to note that, because then if you think about higher ed chaplaincy, who has been in that role? But Christian chaplains. And so perhaps what's unique about USC is that we had a long history of university chaplains and a variety of Christian chaplains on our campus until 1996, which is when we opened our Office of Religious Life. And who was our first dean of religious life? But Rabbi Susan Lemley. And that was historic, because not only was she the first Jewish leader, she was also one of the first women Jewish leaders to take on such a role at a private institution such as ours. And that really demonstrated something to, I think, American higher education, that there was a wave of thinking about religion that wasn't within a Christian context. If we have such a diverse nation, how are we approaching this idea of religion and spirituality, not just from a Christian lens, but from every sort of direction? Because as you already heard, people are quickly disaffiliating, our young adults are disaffiliating, so what does that mean for their spiritual lives? And so Varun, I don't think it was in his bio, but he also marked a historic moment in higher ed chaplaincy, being the first and still the only, I think, dean of religious life that came from a Hindu worldview. And then, of course, I was working at Stanford University for quite a while. And there, it was interesting because they had Memorial Church at the center of their campus, and it's the heart of campus. So many things happened there, from convocation to baccalaureate. It was the site to go to. I was drawn there because I was really into interfaith work. And I found it a very, very great workspace. I got to oversee operations at Memorial Church, at our Interfaith Center, as well as our Contemplative Center. But there was something about the work that I found boring. And I don't mean to make light of it, but because I was in a church, I was bound to a Christian calendar, and so I had to make sure that the program for the Sunday service was in line, that we had, everything in order for a Sunday service. But then I noticed our congregation was not students. I was like, why is all my energy going towards a Sunday service when all my students are off on the grass enjoying their Sunday, that warm weather? And I was like, where are their spiritual lives taking place? And so one thing led to another, and somehow I got a job at USC. And I guess the unique thing about me is that I'm the first secular humanist to be a university chaplain at any American institution. And what that means is I'm an atheist. I don't believe in the supernatural, but I do believe in people and our ability to make meaning out of our lives. And I'm absolutely dedicated to that. I went to seminary. I did clinical pastoral education. I check all these boxes for a religious leader. I just don't use the language of religion, because when so many of our students are disaffiliated, they're coming to me not with a religious literacy, they're coming to me with very unique backgrounds and upbringings. And so as a spiritual professional, my job is to meet them where they are. And I think one of the biggest challenges when people get so concerned about young adults being non-religious is that, again, just like we heard from our colleague from Fuller Theological, there's this deficit mindset about they are lacking. But actually, every individual has so many gifts that they receive from their families, from their cultures, from their contexts, that can really aid them in building a really flourishing spiritual life for themselves. But for so long, they've been told they're not Christian, they're not Jewish, they're not Muslim, so what are they coming with? They're coming with a lot. So a lot of what we have to do is learn their language, learn what brings them alive, learn what is sacred to them. And yeah, it doesn't come to you from a sacred text necessarily that's telling you what you should think is important. It's coming from their lived experience. And so it's gonna take us a while to understand what this new landscape of religious and spiritual, well-being looks like, but it is a lot of fun to be at USC because every single day I'm meeting a new student and I'm learning what is sacred to them. So with that context, let me tell you a little bit about what we do at USC. So there's a lot, actually. What did you say, 50,000 students? And I wonder how many we actually get to meet, from the classroom to the religious center to our events. But one thing Varun had not mentioned is that under his tenure in the last 16 years at USC is that the Office of Religious and Spiritual Life had birthed Mindful USC, which you now see at many universities, right? And what is mindfulness? It's teaching us how to slow down and pay attention. And in what we heard earlier is called an attention scarcity moment, what do we need more? But the ability to strengthen those skills, to be with ourselves, to be with what's going on inside, and to be fully present to what's going on around us. So Mindful USC was an important step towards getting not only our students, but our staff and our faculty to be more mindful about what they're doing every day. And that's really taken off, and like I said, you can see something similar at most universities these days. Additionally, in the last 10 years, or maybe, 7 to 10 years, we've launched Yoga USC. Again, there's a lot of rich traditions coming that build into the various forms of yoga, but what is that doing? That's getting you to slow down, but it's also getting you into your body, right? A lot of people that I meet, even adults of various ages, sometimes are unable to connect with what's going on with them. And so certain things can come out differently, but yoga teaches you to be attuned to your body. And so I was really glad this year we launched our first teacher training program for yoga instructors, and we had 15 students graduate with their yoga certification this year, and that was something which was a first for us. I'm not sure how many other universities really have that going on for them. So those are two big things we're doing at USC, but let me tell you about some of the more perhaps innovative things. So when I came to USC, we already had a very thriving community called the Secular Student Fellowship. And these were students who were atheist, agnostic, humanist, other, seeker, whatever you call it. But what bound them together was a vision for a world that could be better. And they were trying to define what is good for them, and what is good in action look like. So a ton of them, of course, were vegan, because if you're gonna be a good person, what does it mean to live an ethical life? It means that you are in touch with the earth and what is going around you, and so if any being, sentient being, is suffering, why would you want to take party to that? So our secular students tend to be vegan and vegetarian, and I guess that's not so innovative here in LA, but it really forced me as a vegetarian of 20 years to then consider what it is to be vegan and to feed college students who demand to be vegan as well. And so even my own diet and my own life has been transformed through students who are pushing for these values. A few other fun things we do. I wanted to talk about Jubilee Cafe, or something we used to have called Good Karma Cafe. We feed hungry students for free. You may think that every student at USC is coming from a certain family and so forth, but actually, this is LA. We've got everyone on that campus. Not every student has a home. Not every student can afford to feed themselves after paying those tuition bills. And so what do? We feed students, but really the opportunity there at the Religious Center, when you're handing out 250 free meals, a few times a week, is the opportunity to connect students to students. Because where does the sacred reside? But between us, right? In our interactions with each other. And you already heard that students are so lonely, so my job really is to help them find a friend. So I'm really glad that USC feeds me as often as it does, because what does that mean? I'm breaking bread with students and with staff, and I'm finding reasons to connect or intersect and make sure that students hopefully go home with a new friend. One of the most significant interactions I saw last school year was over a ping pong table. Sounds silly, right? But you see a ping pong table in every community center or whatever. But not everyone's into ping pong, but we got one at the Religious Center because, hey, I like to play. I was playing a student, and another student came up and was like, I had no idea we had a ping pong table on campus. I'm like, yeah, it's right here, and you can play anytime. And so at one point, I just sort of stepped away from the ping pong table and let that student who just walked up connect with the other student. And by the time I came back 10 minutes later, they were exchanging phone numbers because they were planning to come back to play again. And as the one girl walked away, she said, I can't believe I made a friend today. She literally said that. And so sometimes we don't even know that spiritual care work is seeing the ability to make friendships and connections where it might just seem like, hey, it's ping pong. But these young adults, all of us, really need those opportunities for connection. So, yeah. So that's ping pong. A couple other things. There's a lot of things we do around food. But let me tell you about tarot, crystals, and astrology. Oh my. Many offices of religious and spiritual life would actively avoid engaging in such work. Maybe we're in LA, maybe we're in a different context than some of our colleagues in the East or Northeast, but we actively engage it because what? Many students, and in this time, many adults are very into astrology, crystals, and tarot. So we created an access point for those students to explore it with myself and one of our other colleagues just to say, like, so what is tarot? What does it mean? What is its history? How do you do it? And I'll tell you, the number of students who came to those events who said, I never wanted to go to the religious center because they had a sense that certain groups didn't want them there. They weren't welcome there. And yet, we brought crystals, we brought tarot, and did all these things, and we had a new set of students come to explore and make meaning out of these activities with us. So that's something we're going to continue doing. And I didn't even mention our very active dream group. What do we all have in common? Well, maybe not all of us. A lot of us dream, right, when we sleep. And so these students, as a student-led group, they just come together once a week to explore the dreams they've had together, and they make sense of it for each other. And so there's a lot to come out of that. One other thing I want to highlight from our Reverend Dr. Brandon Harris is that when he joined our staff in the fall of 2022, he came up with this idea because he saw a very real need, and we were always talking about, like, where does community exist? Where can we cultivate just more spaces for students to interact? And he said, you know what? We need a barbershop. And what did we do? We popped up a barbershop at the religious center in our dining hall, and we couldn't cut enough hair. That was how many people needed a haircut on our campus. We had a sign-up list that could not be seen. And so that barber brought another barber, and we're bringing more barbers just because a lot of students don't have that. But what do you do at a barbershop? You hang out. You watch sports. You talk to the guys around you, right? You eat some snacks while you're waiting to get in line. That created that opportunity for community. And so we might be breaking some university policies with that, but hey, at the University Religious Center, we tend to have quite a few religious accommodations, and we really lean into that so we can do some of this fun stuff. And I do want to just reflect on the idea of a barbershop, because you may know the theologian Anthony Pinn. He talked about sacred spaces and how we all tend to know these sacred architectural sites, right, that where congregations come together. But he talked about cafes, he talked about barbershops, and the ways in which we can be in connection there. And so we're truly trying to cultivate spaces for meaningful connection. And everything I've talked about is really sort of trying to demonstrate where to connect. So as I move to close my remarks, I want to tell you that there's a few things we do at USC intentionally around spiritual well-being. So at USC, we have 8 zones of well-being, and had I prepared slides, I'd show it to you here. But the important thing is, not every university has spirituality and purpose as one of their well-being zones. In fact, many universities actively avoid engaging religion because what? That's tension-inducing. We don't want to go there. Tell me why our cultural centers do not want to engage with the conversation around identity around one's religious and spiritual views. Because if one is Black and Muslim, do they feel as welcome in the Black Cultural Center than they do at the Muslim prayer space? In the MENA Lounge, the Middle East North African Lounge, you know, there's different folks in there. Not everyone is Muslim, right? Not everyone is Christian. Where do people feel they belong? And I've noticed on many university campuses just that people are scared to engage with religion. And we need to do better to understand that our identities truly are intersecting, and we can understand ourselves in that complexity, but a lot of people are just avoiding the conversation. And so I'm glad that spirituality is in one of our zones of well-being. It means USC is very intentional about cultivating spiritual well-being on our campus. And so we, as an office, are engaged with the Well-Being Collective, and our priorities for the next 2 coming years is not only thriving and flourishing, but also equity in the classroom, because we forget that our academic calendars are basically on a Christian calendar. How are we asking our students who are not Christians to ask for the Holy Day observances, to ask for access to prayer space? And it's on the students. And so we want to be proactive about creating spaces where they can really feel they belong. And then lastly, I want to circle back to what I said at the beginning, this whole idea of a deficit mindset, that the disaffiliated or non-affiliated are not religious or they don't have rituals. We all have rituals in our lives. We just may not, put it to paper to say, like, this is a habit of spiritual well-being. And so one of the biggest things I do as a spiritual care provider is I do spiritual identity mapping as well as spiritual care assessments with every student I meet. But we're proactive that when we're doing orientation for new students, what do we do at our religious center open house? We talk about how they're going to make that dorm, which oftentimes is uncomfortable because they are living with someone they don't know and they have to do whatever with food. We will help them create an altar or a sacred space in their dorm. And so we have tables where they can create these things and really hone in on what is sacred for them. And so that altar takes the shape of it. For many Asians like myself, it's an ancestral altar, and it's like being intentional about bringing in images of my family and those before me so that I am strengthened by their presence in my space. So that's something we do, and that's something that can go across traditions, right? But is also very familiar to Christians, Buddhists, and others. I think I have many more examples because I'm telling you we have a lot of fun on campus, but I think I'll go ahead and wrap that up and just remind you that our students are blessed with very rich spiritual lives. It's us, the elders, I guess, that need to figure out the language and the connections with them to help truly cultivate that spiritual well-being. So thank you for listening.